Julian Lennon's life has been defined by shadows. The shadow of a legendary father, the shadow of a broken family, and the shadow of expectation. Since his father walked away from his first family, Julian's youth was one of abandonment and hardship, far removed from the glamorous life that others had envisioned. The agony of being raised in the shadow of fame, but mostly alone, is one that Julian has brought into adult life. Now, decades on, he talks unflinchingly about those who formed and sometimes tormented his life. It is a tale of family deceit and a search for understanding that has spanned a lifetime. Julian Lennon was just 5 when his father John Lennon deserted him and his mother Cynthia for Yoko Ono. The breakup of two 1960s icons shocked fans across the globe, but far more traumatically through Julian's own childhood, leaving him to stumble his way through a childhood of absence and bewilderment. To Julian, the drama of the Beatles' breakup was always beside the point. What he experienced was the hard truth that his father had left him and his mother behind. In subsequent interviews, he confessed that he never could quite comprehend how one could leave a child so thoroughly behind. That scar informed much of his early emotional life. Cynthia, having to bring up Julian on a limited income, took the roles of both mother and guardian. She did, without what she had, even selling items passed down from her family, just to ensure Julian got food, clothes, and education, providing a stability in other respects uncertain setting. School was no less difficult. The world presumed that the Beatles' son grew up rich, and such a misperception made him an easy target for bullies. The neighborhood children thought he could use unlimited funds at his disposal, and he frequently was the victim of envy attacks. Still, through such struggles, Julian became strong, capable of living in a world that was both spellbound by and merciless toward his surname. These events gave him an early perception of wealth and fame. Things are not always as they seem, and a celebrity's child life is anything but idyllic. John Lennon's image as a revolutionary face advocating peace and love in the minds of the masses was juxtaposed with years of silence and absence for Julian. The injustice and abandonment of his youth hardened into frank, sometimes bitter comment on his father and his father's second wife. It became a tension that Julian brought with him to adulthood, a complex relationship with a man who was both his father and stranger. As Julian entered his teenage years, his connection with John Lennon was still remote, intermittent, and thick, with unstated tension. Following the divorce, their relationship consisted of infrequent visits or phone calls, which usually proved tense and not supportive. John had completely resigned himself to his new existence with Yoko Ono, and afterward, with the arrival of Sean in 1975, Julian could only observe from a distance as his father adopted the role of indulgent parent, something that had never been his own. The contrast hurt. In public, John was known as a man who walked away from the music business to take care of his youngest son. To Julian, it was simply a reminder of what he had lost. The contrast in treatment was so extreme that it became one of the more discussed elements of their dysfunctional relationship. Julian has never hesitated to label his father a hypocrite. In interviews, he emphasized the hypocrisy of John Lennon talking to the world about love and peace and then destroying his original family. One especially heartless comment once made at John's expense, that Julian was the result of a whiskey bottle and Sean was born out of love, haunted him for many decades. Whether or not entirely true, the words stung and represented the emotional distance between father and son. But their relationship was not completely non-existent. In the early 1970s, when John was estranged from Yoko, his girlfriend at the time, May Pang, persuaded him to spend time with Julian. For a little while, their relation improved. John acquired Julian a Gibson Les Paul guitar and a drum machine, and they shared laughter and music together. These were among the best times Julian had with his father, but they were short-lived. When John came back to Yoko, contact was resumed on a regular basis, and the distance between them grew once again. By the mid-teens of Julian, there were tentative indications of restrained reconciliation. John would sometimes phone from New York, and one evening he played over the phone a newly mixed recording, just like starting over. Julian was amazed at the optimism in his father's voice, the happiness he appeared to be experiencing. For an instant, he felt his father to be in a good place. But the hope of restoring their relationship would soon be destroyed by a senseless act of violence. On December 8, 1980, the evening of John Lennon's death, and Julian's tenuous hope was brutally shortened. Earlier that evening in New York, John had paused outside his Manhattan apartment building to sign a copy of Double Fantasy for a young admirer named Mark David Chapman. Hours earlier, after an evening recording session at around 10:50 p.m., Chapman was still lingering. He drew a revolver and shot John 4 times in the back at close range. 10 minutes after, John Lennon was declared dead at Roosevelt Hospital. The world woke up in shock, unable to accept the fact that one of the most renowned and iconic musicians of all time had been killed on his own doorstep. There was a statement from Yoko Ono stating there would be no funeral, calling on the public instead to remember John by keeping his commitment to peace alive. As the world wept, in North Wales, Julian dealt with his tragedy in secrecy. He lived at his mother Cynthia's home in the town of Ruthin at the time, having just returned from board school. He had been hoping to see his father once again. Just a few days before, John had telephoned him from New York, his voice alive as he sang, just like starting over down the telephone line, a new Double Fantasy song. Julian recalled saying to him how much he loved it, finally feeling for once that his father was a place of happiness. That evening, while sleeping in the attic bedroom of Castle Street House, Julian was suddenly woken up, not by a call, but by the chimney falling into his room. It was an unusual, nearly symbolic moment of destruction. He soon discovered the truth. His father had disappeared. The last time he had heard John's voice, it had been filled with optimism, talking about the future, about music, about life. Now that voice was silenced forever. Those last words are still in Julian's head, not just because they were the last, but also because they spoke of the relationship they could have had if only they were given the opportunity. In another universe, maybe they would have made amends and wiped out the years of pain. In this one, though, all that was left was John's music and the complicated, unfinished love of son and father. In the initial wake of John Lennon's death, the public eye was upon Yoko Ono and Sean, his 5-year-old son. For Julian, however, the weeks and months that ensued were populated with legal papers, financial exclusion, and agonizing reminders of where he ranked in his father's rearranged life. When John's will was read, Julian found that he had been left nothing outright. All his estate, which was worth approximately $220 million, fell into Yoko's hands. The only thing she left for Julian was a £100,000 trust fund, a paltry amount against the massive wealth created by the Beatles' back catalog, John's solo records, and future royalties. This wasn't about the money for Julian. It was about recognition, something concrete that would recognize his place in his father's life. The imbalance cut deeper into the wounds of childhood. Sean had shared the same house with John in his last years, enjoying the paternal love Julian had always yearned for. Yoko, executor of John's estate, held sway over all that John had left behind, both monetarily and personally. Years passed, and Julian realized how much of his father's legacy was being kept from him. He eventually made a legal claim against the estate, starting a brutal fight that lasted almost 2 decades. The battle was emotionally exhausting, and public opinion was usually brutal. People thought Julian was after money he didn't deserve, ignoring the fact that he was battling for connection to his father's possessions, letters, instruments, and keepsakes that contained personal history. In the mid-1990s, following decades of wrangling, he finally settled on a reported $20 million. It provided him with fiscal security, but could not wipe away the resentment of having to fight for what he felt should have been his own from the very beginning. His attitude towards Yoko Ono had been characterized for many years by resentment. She was the woman his father had picked over his mother, the central figure in the breakup that had broken up his family. She was not only a stepmother to him. She represented the embodiment of all that had gone wrong in his life as a child. The protracted court battle only served to heighten his distrust. Each round of negotiation, and each reminder that she held claim over his father's fortune raised the wall between them. Julian acknowledged in interviews that he could never envision her as anything except an enemy, a person with personal and financial authority over his relationship to his father. Public appearances by the Lennon family were characterized by courteous avoidance, guarded smiles, and scant interaction. Nevertheless, there were occasional moments when the frost appeared to dissipate. One of those times was in September 2010 at the opening of Julian's photography show Timeless. In the same space was Cynthia, Sean, Mei-Pang, and Yoko. To everyone's surprise, the evening went by without incident, with smiles, courteous chat, and even light hugs. It wasn't reconciliation, but it proved they could exist without reopening old sores. Over time, Julian came to see his relationship with Yoko through the eyes of his love for Sean. He understood that antagonism toward her would ultimately hurt his half-brother, whom he shared a warmth and sincerity of bond with. He acknowledged that if he damaged the mother of Sean, he would damage Sean, and that was something he couldn't bring himself to do. This change did not expunge the past or result in profound friendship, but it brought hesitant peace. His love for Yoko is still complicated, one based on past and wounds, but by putting his relationship with Sean first, he managed to tone down his rage. Despite growing up in different homes, with different mothers and vastly different experiences of John Lennon, Julian and Sean forged a bond built on mutual respect and shared loss. "We've never had a fight in our life," Julian once told Esquire, a rare expression of uncomplicated warmth in an otherwise painful story. Their bond was forged more by the collective experience of what it was like to have the Lennon name looming over them, and less by mutual childhood memories, of which they had nearly none. Julian's childhood was one of absence, observing his father's life from a distance, whereas Sean's childhood was dominated by the everyday presence of John's love, until that evening in December 1980. The contrasts might have pushed them apart, but they brought empathy instead. They both understood the burden of the world's interest, the constant comparisons, and the challenge of creating an identity independent of a globally recognized father. Their bond grew over the years. Julian was in attendance for Sean's show in Paris in 2006, the first time he had seen his younger brother on stage. They grew closer together for Sean's tour in 2007, slowly bridging the years of separation. Julian frequently talks about Sean proudly and guardedly, admitting that his desire to stay on good terms with Yoko is because he does not wish to hurt his brother. Their closeness was seen most of all in 2021 at the London premiere of The Beatles' Get Back documentary. Side by side, they sat watching previously unseen footage of their father at work in the studio, funny, cynical, full of ideas. It was life-changing for Julian. "The film has made me love my father again in a way that I can't put into words," he posted on Instagram. It was as if, with Sean's presence and the mutual experience of seeing John once again, some of the bitterness was substituted with something softer.